let's get into our Tehillim time. The psalm for the day today is Psalm 15. And for those of you who have learned your Hebrew numerals, this is a nice refresher. If you take a look over here, Psalm, and here we have it in the Hebrew. Notice it's not Yod, right? Usually, all of the teens, there's a logical order to the way numbers happen in Hebrew. And when you hit 11, it's basically Yod, which is 10, plus Aleph, right? So that's logical. You hit 12, it's Yod plus Beit, Yod plus Gimel, Yod plus Dalet. But when we get to 15, the number does not start with the Yod, because the Masoretes, understanding the sanctity of the name, did not want to have a number sharing one of the forms of Hashem's name. So instead of writing Yod Hey, which would have been the nickname, kind of the short version of Hashem, instead we write Tet Vav, which is 9 plus 6, which you still get 15. And the next psalm does a similar thing. Instead of writing Yod plus Vav, because that looks too much like part of God's name, instead, the way the number is done in the Bible is Tet plus Zion, so you get 9 plus 7. And then at 18, we return back, at 17, we return back to normal things. Yod plus Zion, Yod plus Chet, Yod plus Tet, and then finally Kaf for 20. So this is Psalm Tet Vav. Oftentimes you'll hear it if you listen to a Hebrew recording. They won't say the actual Hebrew number for 15, but they'll say the letters that represent that psalm, Tet Vav. Let's get started. In this psalm, it's a liturgy specifying the moral qualities required for admission to the temple. And I took that one-line zinger from Mitchell Dahood. So I like that. And if you keep that in mind when we're reading it, it's like describing what is required morally for someone to enter into the Beit HaMikdash, or the Hechal Hashem, Hechal Elohim, all these different names it has, the temple of God. Mizmor LeDavid, a psalm of David. Right? And the Lamed, we learned from Ugaritic, can mean of, also in older Hebrews. Adonai mi yagul be'oholecha. O Adonai, who shall yagul? Yagul, it's the verb gul, which means sojourn. Really, it's kind of got a nuance here related to that, like who can be your guest, right? To sojourn in a tent doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, right? So you sojourn in a country, you sojourn in a city, right? You sojourn in a medina, right? In a province, right? Like that. You don't really sojourn in a tent, right? So it's something more like, who will be your guest? Who will be your guest in your ohol? It's usually ohel, but here it's because of some spelling issues, it becomes oholecha. Mi yishkon b'har kodshecha. In typical Hebrew parallelism, we have the first part expresses the concept, and now we broaden the concept. Who shall yishkon? Who shall? This is, of course, the verb shachan, which is not shakachan, if you have a stutter. Shakachan, no. Yashachan is to inhabit, like to fill up a house, right? To abide in a place, right? To make an abode, right? And of course, it's where we get the noun, the mishkan from, right? The tabernacle. It's from the verb shakan. And we have another word from this, say shoken, is a neighbor. It's another word for neighbor. And if you pray the Siddur, you probably remember the one prayer, shoken ad marom, right? So anyway, so who shall dwell? Who shall inhabit the har kodshecha, your holy har, your holy mountain? And here's the answer: holech tamim ufoel tzedek. The one who halachs, right? This is a participle, who walks, tamim, blamelessly. And I pointed out before, this is the same word which is used to describe our ancestor, Yaakov Avinu. We are told that he was after his brothers described, the Torah then, in typical Hebrew parallelism, describes the antonym of his brother, which is himself. And he says Yaakov was an ish tam. He was a blameless man. So don't give in to the anti-Semitic interpretation by the Goyish churches that Yaakov was somehow a liar or a cheater, and that the name Yaakov means like twisted one or usurper or some other kind of nonsense. His name just comes from the word for heel. It was like a play on words. They saw him grabbing his brother's heel, so they called him healer, something like that, right? He's a healer. right? Not like to heal from sickness, but to grab a heel like that. What parent would name their child deceiver or liar or something like this? It's just ridiculous if you think about it. Anti-Semitism is steeped in a lot of the Goyish church teachings. But the one who holech tamim, like our ancestor walked blamelessly, also the one who walks blamelessly, ufoel tzedek, and who does pa'al. This is a synonym to asa, but there's asa can also mean to make, right? So pa'al is to do. This is where we get the modern Hebrew word for verb. It comes from this, and we even use it in the verb conjugations, the verb paradigms. You'll learn about if you haven't learned about that yet. So ufoel, and one who does tzedek. What does tzedek mean? Tzedek. Yeah, excellent. Naomi wrote the numerals there. Beautiful. Yep. So tzedek is usually the first gloss people have is righteousness, and that's correct. But it also has the meaning of justice. And I guess you can see how those two are clearly related, justice and righteousness, right? We have another word, mishpat, we use for justice, yeah. But tzedek also has that meaning, especially in legal contexts, right? And a lot of times doing justice is what the Torah considers to be righteousness. It's all about the legal code. It's all about following the rules. It's all about being good boys and girls. It's all about doing what Daddy tells us to do. So the one who does justice or does righteous things. In some of the Psalms, it even means like a green meadow, and there's some other meanings this word can take on, but we won't get into that now. V'dover emet, and the one who, and this is a very poetic expression here. Usually, we do not see this verb, this root letters, dalet, bet, resh, this verb, in a call active participle form like this. Usually, we would instead say omer, right, or medaber, we would say in the pl. So it's poetic to see it this way in the psalm. So the psalmist is probably hinting something deeper about. I should have thought about that before. There might be some deeper reason for choosing this word here. Yeah. Oh, okay. I think I see the next line. Oh, beautiful, Baruch Hashem. So we're going to get to it. So the one who speaks emet. What's emet? Emet means truth. Truth. You all know the story of the golem? Right? Not from Lord of the Rings, but the name is taken from Jewish folklore. There's the story that there was a rabbi, an Ashkenazi rabbi in the Middle Ages, who he created a creature out of clay, and then he wrote on its forehead this word, emet, emet, right? Like truth, like that. And the creature became alive. And it served the rabbi. It carried all those heavy things around, all this kind of stuff. And again, just a story. But the story goes on. It's very popular, though, this story. The story goes on that the golem, one Friday, the rabbi forgot to tell the golem to rest. And so it worked on part of Shabbat. And it went insane. And it went around after that. The next week it started killing people and destroying things. Until finally the rabbi caught up with it. And he erased the aleph, which is interesting because sometimes aleph will fall away from some words in the Tanakh, the first aleph. And so that created the word met. And who knows what met means? Met means dead. So that is how he was able to stop the golem. So emet, it means truth, but it also means, in some contexts, just like tzedek has two meanings and more. Emet is true, but it's also the person who is true. The person who's true, i.e., the one who has fidelity. Right, so like when we wrap the tefillin around our hands, we imply that we think about how it's with fidelity that we are betrothing ourselves to Hashem. So the one who dover emet bilavalvo. Okay, so this is a bit trickier. It doesn't make a lot of sense if you just read it by shot meaning. If you just read the one who speaks truth in his levav, in his heart, right, or in his mind. What do you mean speaking truth in your mind? You're telling yourself the truth? So really, to make this a little bit clearer, I have a little marker here. This is Paleo Hebrew, mean. It's from Paleo Hebrew. It's just, I put this sign on the Psalms as I'm studying them, and then when I'm reading commentaries, and when I come across it on my own time, when I'm just going through the Psalms, I don't have to look up my notes. I see it, and I remember, oh yeah, this should be from here. So this tells me that Beit, just like Beit and Lamed, usually you don't learn this when you study from normal Hebrew grammars, but they can have the meaning from. And so this is nice. So he speaks truth from his heart. And so, of course, if we're talking about moral qualities required for admission to the temple, surely purity is one of them. And what does Yeshua HaMashiach, what does the Messiah say is something that causes a level of impurity? Even if we're eating kashrut, even if we're eating kosher food, like they are in the example when Yeshua speaks about. He says regarding certain traditions of washing your hands before eating in a ritualistic manner, right, which is not mitzvah, he says that it's not what goes into a person's mouth, meaning it's not just that it's kosher food that you wash your hands with the purifying water, but it's what comes out of the person's mouth, right? So he's never going against the assumption that that someone would break God's law and eat unclean food. So the emphasis he's putting is on speech, right? That it's more because the people he's talking to in that particular circumstance had a big problem with Motzi Shemra and Lashon Hara, right? And so he's responding to them because of their characteristics of having wicked speech. He's saying, you're so concerned about the tradition of hand washing that you're going to criticize someone about that, where you yourselves are making yourselves tameh, impure, because of the lies that you speak about me and about my talmidim. You see, so that's the subtlety that's happening there. So, from the heart, truth that one speaks comes from his mind, right? Heart, of course, we know means mind in biblical Hebrew. Lo ragal al leshono, lo asa l'reyehu. All right, so he does not. And ragal, this is kind of a loaded word, very interesting. I mean, it can mean, the first definition you'll learn with ragal is slander. Slander, right? So this works very well, right? We're talking about he speaks truth from his heart, right? From his mind, right? So it's coming out, is what he's saying. So that's the positive example, right? He does tzedek, he speaks emet, and he lo ragal, he does not slander al against, or pardon me, with in this case, with leshono, his lashon, his tongue or his speech. Lo asalare, who he doesn't do to his neighbor ra'ah, anything evil, or he doesn't make evil against his neighbor, right? Especially in the issue of speech, right? But there's another meaning to this word which also works. This verb, ragal, there are many verbs in Hebrew and Ugaritic that are related to body parts. And it turns out that they can be used to specify using a body part a certain way or something that might happen with that body part. So while ragal can mean, oops, a typo there, not to lander, but to slander, it can also mean to trip because regel means feet. If you change the vowels here, the noun regel means feet. Like we just recently celebrated Shavuot, which was one of the shalosh raglayim, right? Raglayim, the 3 foot festivals, right? Raglayim, it's something you do with your feet, right? You go there, you go to Jerusalem, right? You go to the Holy Temple. And so it also can mean to trip. Now look at this. So he does not trip upon his own tongue, and he does not do against his neighbor ra'ah, evil. The chelpa los nasa al kerovo. And look at this, nasa. This is the name of today's Torah portion, right? So there it is in our psalm, nasa. So he does not lift up lo nasa al against kerovo. So this word, I colorize it so that you'd see the root, right? Kuf resh bet. What does that root mean? Who recognizes the root? Karav. Karav, to draw near, right? To approach, right? This is where we get the noun korban, an offering, right? Something that you would bring to Hashem. And even when the priest, when the Kohen brings it near in the Hefil form to cause to bring near, that's how we translate to offer, right? He offers it to Hashem, like, or he sets it in place is kind of what's happening, right? He makes it go near, technically, is what's happening. So this is the one who's near to him. So you could translate this something like his neighbor or his friends or his relatives. Those are near to him, right? So he doesn't trip upon his own tongue. He doesn't do anything evil to his neighbor. And now with Hebrew parallelism after the end of clause marker here, the nachta, we have nor reproach does he lift up. Oh yeah, I forgot to translate. Nor reproach does he lift up upon those who are near to him, right? So this is actually really good, especially if you think about, I'm an admirer of Japanese culture. I actually had a plane ticket there one time, and I was gonna go. It was one of these Cebu Pacific deals. I bought it like 6 months in advance for like, what was it? It was like 300 pesos. It's crazy, right? And so I thought, I'll buy it as an option to go, right? So maybe I can go. Maybe I won't. Okay, someone's got their microphone on. I'm gonna have to. Okay, mute all. Boom. All right, Baruch Hashem. I'm getting better at muting all now. so, so I ended up not going. But one thing that I admire greatly about Japan is just the fact that they have such a low crime rate, right? And I have a friend of mine I used to travel around with, Stan, and Stan is an American, but he's ethnically Japanese, right? And he told me we were talking about Japan one time, and he said the reason for that is it's no one wants to bring shame on their family. Everyone is concerned to bring shame on their family. If someone goes to prison for something, or if if he steals something, people leave their bicycles with their groceries out on the street. I'm told they don't bother to lock it up or take it in with them. They just leave it because nobody takes it. Can you imagine? Imagine that happening here in Philippines. Somebody is going to steal anything. I mean, to be fair, no one's starving in Japan either, right? So, but nevertheless, you have to admire that culture where they don't have the Bible, but they they really have these acts of tzedek, of righteousness. And so, anyway, I think this is a similar concept. Reproach he does not bring upon those who are near to him, his friends, his family, his direct neighbors, right? Because there's supposed to be a good connection with the neighbor. Nivzeh be'enaiv nim'as ve'et yir'ei Adonai yechabed. Yechabed. Nivzeh, let's start with this one. So the root on this is baza. Baza, I should have just highlighted that part instead of the noon, but Beit Zayin Hey. Baza is to despise. To despise. And from this we get the noun booze. And sometimes you hear it as booze, right? So talking about we've had enough booze. You had enough booze. Had enough being despised, right? And so this one here, you'd say it's the one who is despised, right? So the despicable man, right? There's a nifal participle. So the one who's despised is a person who's despicable. A despicable person, like someone who does bad things, right? So this is the contrary to what the tzaddik does, right? He doesn't do all this bad stuff. The one who's worthy to enter into the Mishkan, the one who is worthy to be a guest in the tents of Hashem, who is worthy to dwell on his holy mountain. Now the contrast is Nivzeh, the despicable man, Be'enaiv. So here again we have the little Paleo-Hebrew meaning from. So we're going to interpret Beit here not in, but from. From his eyes, which will be a little bit more flexible with this. You can say from his sight, right? Or from his presence, something like that, right? Like a king might say, out from my sight, right? Really, it means out of his presence, right? Are you ever really out of Hashem's sight, right? So let's see. The despicable man, from his presence, nim'as, nim'as. So ma'as can mean a few things. It can mean like to refuse or to reject, right? Like they have rejected me, Hashem says, ma'asu oti in part of the Torah. So in this case, Dahood recommends that we change the vowel here to be a patach. So that changes it to actually be, instead it becomes a participle, right? Pardon me, perfect. Right now it's a participle, it becomes a perfect. So we can actually translate this as is rejected. So the despicable man from his presence is rejected. The et yirei Adonai. Now this is interesting. Et is coming before the verb, right? So there's special emphasis here. But the God-fearers, the Hashem-fearers, those who yara, those who fear Hashem, yechabed. So the plain meaning of this is he will honor, right? He'll honor them. But there's a little bit more going on here, and you notice these little fonts I have here. This is Ugaritic markings to remind me that there's an Ugaritic meaning here that sheds light. And in Ugaritic text, we find that this verb is used to mean to throw a feast, like an honor banquet, something like that. And so it's very interesting, especially if you think about the wedding of the Lamb, right? The feast of the Lamb, all these sorts of things and we're talking about dwelling in Hashem's tents on His holy mountain, being His guest. And in Jewish culture, I should say in Israelite culture, to treat a guest well was so important, right? You see it even with the despicable Lot, right? Even he is willing to protect his guests as much as he can. And so it makes sense that we would interpret this along with the Ugaritic meaning to Hashem will give a banquet for him. Nishba lehara v'yamir. Nishba, he swore lehara. And this is kind of weird because on the surface it looks like a he-fil infinitive construct meaning to do evil, right? He swore to do evil. So let's look at this. So the lamed could mean, and here I have the Paleo Hebrew mean from. So he swore from evil. Or in other words, he swore not to do any harm, something like that. He swore to do no wrong. And we have some explanations of this. Here I copied it from Dahood's commentary, which I think is very nice. So if you're interested in that, you can look at that. I won't go into more detail right now. Velo yamir, and not to change, right? And of course, we understand that's true, that Hashem does not allow any great harm to come through those whom he loves, and he himself, lo yamir, does not change. Kaspo lo natan beneshech. Okay? So here we're talking about the tzaddik, the one who has rights to go into the temple. His money, his silver, literally, kesef means silver, kaspo, the o means his, so his silver, lo natan, he does not give, be neshech, with neshech. Neshech means biting, and this is the word that comes from nashach, to bite, and this is where we get the word usury, like interest, right? So for interest. The shochad, nor a bribe, al naki. So al here, instead of upon, it's going to mean from. That's one meaning we can get from al, from, naki. So naki on the surface looks like it means innocent, but it really in context means something like hungry. There's another place in the Bible where this is used, and you can tell it means like to have those who have lean teeth, right? So idea their teeth are kind of showing they're hungry, right? So he doesn't take a bribe from the hungry. It doesn't make sense to say from the innocent. I mean, because you're not supposed to take a bribe from anyone, the innocent or the guilty, right? If you take a bribe from the innocent, you've just made them guilty. So here we have this in Amos 4:6. You can see that traditionally cleanness of teeth, for example, is how RSV translates that. But more correctly, according to Dahood, hungry mouths, right? So he doesn't give interest on his loans, and he doesn't take bribes from the hungry. Or you could say gift. Shochad can actually mean a gift. That's probably better than saying bribe, right? So a hungry person tries to give you something. Yeah, I like that better. I should have translated that way. So yeah, this is nice. So his silver, his money, he does not give out with interest, right? So he's helping people, right? He's giving it out to help them. Nor a gift from the hungry. Lo Leqach, he doesn't take, he doesn't accept, right? Because the person's hungry. How can you take a gift from them, right? Especially if it's especially if it's going to influence their situation. So ose ele, the one who does ele, these, that's demonstrative adjective the Hebrew class had recently. Lo yimot leolam. He shall not trip or totter or slip forever. Leolam. And of course, this is the same word that we see connected to many parts of the Torah to say all these things that you are commanded today, you shall do them leolam. You shall keep them leolam, forever and ever. And like as I like to say, not ... ellipsis until Mashiach comes. Forever. Mashiach is righteous, and he doesn't undermine righteousness either. Instead, he shows us how to keep it properly. Okay? Any comments or questions on the psalm? We're making good time today, Baruch Hashem. Of course, it was a shorter psalm also. Okay, so I can see the chat. So if you guys want to write anything, if you have any questions, go ahead.